Well, very good morning to you all. So Partnership Registrar, what is it? Partnership Registrar is a very unusual role, I have to say, and I've only been in it for 11 months and 3 weeks. So although I've worked for the John Lewis Partnership for nearly 30 years, I'm a bit of a lifer, but this role is one that's very new to me. So the role itself sits on the John Lewis board, but it's sort of a non-executive role. It's a role which is the conscience of the business. I suppose the lift or the escalator short phrase for what the role does is it brings humanity to commerce. So the idea is that I act as the memory and the critical friend of all the executive members of the board to remind them of the things that they said when they forget when they're making decisions, and to bring the voice of our employees to the table to make sure that when decisions are being made, our partners, as we call them, our employees, have a voice at the board table. And that their views are heard by the board, but they're heard by an independent person that doesn't report to anyone round the board apart from the chairman. So as a consequence, I sort of have a single boss who's the main man in our organisation, and I'm not accountable to anyone else around the table, which means I can bring that opinion without fear or favour. So that's broadly my role, which has been my life for 11 months and 3 weeks, which has been great. So just a quick whistle-stop tour about what I've done. So I graduated in biology, so I didn't do anything to do with retail at all. I was going to become a doctor, but I failed my physics A-level, and so I thought, what am I going to do? So I did biology, my favourite subject. My school wouldn't allow me to do sciences and arts. I wanted to do biology, chemistry, and English. That's what I wanted to do, but it wouldn't let me. And this is where I've ended up. So I'm quite happy. I think I'm probably happier here than I am as a consultant or a doctor. Nothing wrong with that profession. But what I've done is I've done a lot of work with people. And I've done a lot of work with people, both working with them, but also with the public in terms of customers. And that's really sort of ticked my boxes. So what I want to do in 10 minutes, I think I've got 10 minutes with you, and then I've got to pose you a question. And then I've got another 10 minutes, and I'm going to pose you another question. So I think that's the way it works. So you've just heard, I think, a little bit about future focus. I just want to talk a little bit about a bit of history, really, about John Lewis, to give you an insight as to where we've come from, but then to talk about an organisation that is operating in today's world with a future focus, but in today's world by holding on to all that was good from the past and making sure that we polish it and cherish it and take it forward. So if this clicker works, which I hope it will, I've clicked it once and it's not, so that doesn't bode well, does it? Is there supposed to be something stuck in here, Henry? That maybe? I think you might have taken that out to put my stick in, so there we go. That sounded good. Come on. Why don't I just, while you sort that, why don't I just revert to page up, page down? There we go. So John Lewis Senior, rather, was the founder, if you like, of the idea of having retail called John Lewis. So he was the youngest silk buyer in London. He set up a shop on Oxford Street in a place which is not too far away from where we trade today. In fact, we just celebrated 150 years worth of trading because we began in 1864. Well done, thank you very much. And he began just in this location, which is on Oxford Street. So between the N of John and the L of Lewis is where the original shop started. That photo-tinted or colour-tinted photo was taken about 20 years after the business had started. So a successful organisation, a successful business, but with a fairly traditional businessman who was a retailer, silk draper, on Oxford Street. So he had two sons, Oswald Lewis and a man unusually called Speeden Lewis, who is the founder of the John Lewis Partnership. An unusual name because John Lewis Senior was brought up by a maiden aunt in Somerset. Her name was Anne Speed. He was going to call his first daughter Anne Speed after his maiden aunt who brought him up as his mother, but he didn't have any daughters, so he turned her name round and gave his first son the name Speed Anne rather than Anne Speed. Hence the name. You're unlikely to see it anywhere else. Now, Speeden Lewis was a slightly unusual man because he was much more commercially minded than his father, interestingly. He was a higher risk taker and he was much more of an entrepreneur. So he was really interested in seeking out different ways of doing things and coming up with brand new ideas. One of those was that he wanted to get to take over his family business in a way which was going to make it more successful than his father had run it. And his sort of germ of an idea was trying to ensure that employees that worked in the business felt more engaged with the business than any of his competitors, which meant they would give more discretionary effort, which meant the business would therefore be a few percentage points more successful than the competition, and therefore would make it much more sustainable. That was the idea. So why have I shown a picture of Regent's Park here on the right-hand side? Well, the reason for that is because whilst these ideas, as they do in many of our minds, I suspect, mould around in Speeden's mind, he never really formed them into any sort of concrete plan until he fell off his horse in Regent's Park, punctured a lung, and had to recuperate for 3 months. And whilst he was recuperating, the only thing he focused on was to create this germ of an idea into a proper plan. The big problem was, of course, he didn't have a father who agreed with his plan. So his father, and actually many of his contemporaries, thought he was completely mad. So imagine it's back in Edwardian Victorian Britain. People are sort of starting off with the idea of empire still being in their minds, then wanting to sort of generate a really commercially successful business for the rich and make sure the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And there was never any sort of thought about social conscience or the way in which an operation could run for the greater good of the people that worked in it. So Speeden was really mindful that he and his brother, who worked in the business for a short while before he went off to become a barrister because he trained in law, and his father took home more in terms of annual income than the whole of the workforce working for them. And that really troubled Speeden. His Regent's Park fall gave him this opportunity to have this utopian moment where he was thinking how he could turn his idea into reality. But he had this one stumbling block, which was his father. However, his father was a little understanding, only because Speeden's mother stepped in occasionally and sort of tried to pour oil on troubled water. They frequently had lots of falling out. And what he did was he allowed Speeden to have a small amount of money to be able to buy Peter Jones. Peter Jones on Sloane Square, some of you may know, it's the very first shop of the John Lewis Partnership. It was the first building that turned into the first cornerstone, if you like, of our business that we know today. It was a Welsh hatter called Peter Jones that ran it at the time, but he wasn't doing terribly well. He tried to extend the business. He pulled a few walls down and in the process killed a few workmen, and so the whole business was a bit of a mess. So Speeden walked down the King's Road, as the story goes, with 1,000 crisp £1 notes in his pocket and bought it. And he then started putting his ideas of partnership into practice. He began thinking about how we could engage people. So communication was high on his list. So he set up an in-house magazine that came out weekly. He set up an in-house democracy system where something called a branch council would meet on about 6 or 7 times a year to be able to hold him and his leadership team accountable for the things that they were doing in the shop. He set up profit sharing, so making sure that the money that was made in Peter Jones was shared equally amongst everyone that worked in the business. But his father was still very, very unhappy that his son was doing this business in Peter Jones. And so the quote goes that he said that you can have this money, you can buy Peter Jones, you can turn these ideas into some form of reality, you can work in that bucket of a shop in Chelsea, as long as you continue working in Oxford Street, the main family shop, until 5 o'clock every evening. So he sort of worked solidly in Oxford Street and then went down to SW3, where he put these ideas into practice. So where does that all lead us to? Well, it led us to, or leads us to, a business like this. So it's definitely been a success, a successful experiment. So £11 billion worth of turnover. We've got 94,000 partners, as we call them. So they're our employees, but as soon as you start as a permanent employee in John Lewis, you become a partner, an owner of the business. We've got 336 branches of Waitrose, 43 branches of John Lewis, and an organisation which is flourishing and doing extremely well. Today, in fact, is the day that we reveal our annual partner survey results as well. So we do an annual survey of our partners to try and test just how happy and engaged they are. So today is the day at 2 o'clock that we get our results coming out for this year. We know that our response rate has been over 90%. So that sort of tells us that people are willing and engaged and want to express their opinion, which is great news. I suppose what I come back to is Speeden, before I sort of begin to come to an end of this first session. Speeden's idea was an interesting one because, as I've said to you, he had the barrier of his father standing in the way of creating this business and this vision. And it took him quite a while to get to a point where he was able to make the John Lewis Partnership the true John Lewis Partnership. So it was in 1929, 1 year after his father died, that he signed the first legal trust settlement, because we're a trust-owned or trust-operated business. That was the first indication that he was going to hand the business over to everyone that worked in it. It took him then from 1929 right the way through to 1950 before he was eventually able to sign the second trust settlement, because he'd put all the building blocks in place in the organisation to ensure that it was running the way that he felt it should. And then he handed us a rule book as well to make sure that we have a series of rules that we all work to. But one of the principles in our constitution, our rule book, is this one here, which is the ultimate purpose is the happiness of all our partners or all our members through their worthwhile and satisfying employment in a successful business. And we're really, really at pains to make sure that our partners understand that there isn't a full stop after the word members. Because it's very easy to say the ultimate purpose of the partnership is the happiness of all our members. Boom, that's it. But he was very, very clear that it had to be through worthwhile and satisfying employment in a successful business. So the employment had to be worthwhile, it had to be needed, it had to be satisfying, so it had to produce an outcome that made the individual feel they were contributing something, and it had to contribute to a sustainable successful business. So all of those are really important. And as I begin to come to the end of my first piece, not quite yet, I just wanted to be able to show you a short video of Speeden himself. So just gives you a sense of the man and what was in his mind when he put the partnership together, if this works. Can you hear that? Sort of a voice from the grave, really, which is always really good. When I was Director of Internal Communications in John Lewis, I discovered this footage, and ever since I've been plying it across the whole of the partnership, just to remind people of where the idea of partnership came from. So it was an experiment, and it was a vision that was born out of this sense of injustice and wanting to make sure the world was a fairer place. And it's really important that, you know, the current generation, as we move several generations away from our founder, understand some of that background. As I say, he was a real entrepreneur, so, you know, some of that fairness extended into the policies that he introduced into John Lewis. So maternity pay and maternity leave, for example, was something that John Lewis started before the government actually made it the law of the land. So a number of things like that. Education for those that were less well off was also high on his list. So quite a lot from Speeden. But as I've said to you, he put all of his ideas down into a rule book, something we call our constitution. If you're interested in it, it's available on the John Lewis Partnership website as a PDF, so you're more than happy, you're more than welcome to go in and have a look at it. It starts with 7 principles. One of those I've mentioned to you already, which is the ultimate purpose of the partnership. But it covers off the way we share our power, and I'll do that in my second half a little bit, but the way we share power within the business, how we share our profit. It talks about our members, and importantly, it talks about the members principle 4, being about employing and retaining as members people of ability and integrity who are committed to working together to support its principles. So if people aren't interested in supporting these, then they shouldn't be a part of the John Lewis Partnership. And we're really clear about that our organisation isn't for everyone. about customers, obviously, because we are a commercial organisation that tries to ensure that we're generating a need and a benefit for our customers. Our business relationships without whom we wouldn't survive, so those suppliers that we work with. And then in a very foresighted way, the community and the way in which we have to make sure that we're applying the letter of the law, but we're also making sure that we are contributing to the well-being of the communities within which we trade. So those 7 principles are the foundation blocks of our constitution. And then we've got something like 120, 130 rules that sit behind that talk, from anything to the way in which we should behave with one another, to how much the chairman is allowed to be paid. So he's only allowed to be paid 75 times the amount that an average selling partner working in London is earning. So there is a regulator there to make sure that he can't earn any more than that. If he was working in any other organisation, he'd probably be earning 3 or 4 times the amount of money that he earns in the John Lewis Partnership. So I was interested in hearing the conversation about pay over here, because actually the conversation about pay in John Lewis, that isn't the motivator. Money isn't the be-all and end-all in John Lewis. It's not about money. It's about having a greater cause, about something that you feel is worth working for, rather than something that you're gaining from personally all the time. So I guess as I finish this, the question I'd pose to you before I move on to my second section is, which do you consider most important in creating a happy workforce? Is it gain, is it knowledge, or is it power? Each of those 3 feature in the John Lewis Partnership Constitution, both gain, knowledge and power, because our founder felt that they were critical to the way in which you shaped an organisation. But I'd just be interested in your discussions on your tables. Henry, I think this is where I hand over, is that right?
And they talk.
Well, you're there, aren't you? Sorry. and you talk.
They talk. So answer this, the 3 minutes on this question at your table.
So, thank you for that, the feedback during the break. It's been very interesting, very helpful. And someone was just talking to me about my role and about how unique it might or might not be. So I think it may exist in other areas, but one of the things I didn't say was that the history to the role that I've got was because when Speeden was alive, in his business, most of the executive in the organisation were men. And so he wanted to set up the caring side of the business that he felt should be a woman. So you would have the mother and the father of the business, making sure they were making decisions in the organisation in a way which created balance. So up until quite recently, the role that I've got was always filled with women. Because they were considered to be the yin or the yang, if you like, of their counterparts. In a much more enlightened and diverse organisation now, I'm pleased to say, there are men in these roles and there are women in executive roles right the way up to board level. So we have a very different approach. But that's where the original sort of concept came from, about ensuring that the caring was there in the organisation. So, last section of my presentation is really about talking to how all of this gets brought to life in reality within our organisation. So we have something called the Partner Customer Profit Circle. Some of you may have read the Harvard Business Review back in, I think it was 2003, where they did some work for the Sears department store in America, which was entitled the Employee Customer Profit Chain. So they were describing about ways in which you could engage your employees more. And I think their metrics were suggesting if you had a 2% increase in engagement from your employees, you were likely to get a 1% improvement in your engagement from customers and a 0.5% improvement in your profit outcomes. So they were trying to promulgate the idea that engaged teams delivered a more successful business, which of course we in John Lewis know only too well. Our model is not a chain, because in the Sears model, of course, the profit goes off to another, whoever may own the shares or may own the business. In our case, our partners own the business, and so we have a circle. So you end up with engaging our employees more, our partners more. Our customers feel that through the customer service they get. They spend more money with us. We generate more profit as an organisation, and we share that profit amongst everyone that works in the business. And the mechanics behind that profit sharing are that about 50% of our overall profit each year is retained for sharing, and a percentage is applied to that, and it's the percentage that we will apply to everyone's pay. So for this last year, 11% of everyone's pay was the number that everyone received as a bonus. And the founder determined that a percentage of pay was the fairest way of being able to work out how much someone had contributed to the success of the business, pay being a sort of a yardstick for how much an individual had added value to the organisation. But in my first year, when I started back in the mid-80s, 24% was the bonus I had when I first started. And I thought, fresh out of university, fantastic, I've come to utopia. Second year, it was also 24%. Third year, it was 22%, but it's oscillated. So we've had years just after the Second World War where there was no bonus paid at all. And partners are fully accepting and understanding that in order to protect the business, there would be no profit sharing. And in some of the years after the Second World War, they even gave back a week's worth of pay in order to make sure that the cash flow in the organisation was protected. So that's the sort of level of engagement you get from partners when this is working really well. Now, we were talking just on this table here, sorry, I don't know your name. Brendan was just mentioning during the discussion about having employees on boards. And I said that's very interesting because I want to describe the governance structure that exists in John Lewis that creates the culture that works really well for us. So we have in our business, and this is defined in our constitution, 3 governing authorities: the chairman, the partnership council, and the partnership board. So the chairman holds all the A shares in John Lewis. We don't list shares, so we're not a publicly listed company, we're a trust-owned business, but we do have something called A shares, and the A shares are always given to the chairman. And the chairman has those A shares because it gives him or her the right to make any decision in our business that they want, absolutely any whatsoever. It has the complete executive authority to do what they like. However, what Speeden wanted to do is he wanted to make sure that that power was held in balance. So the first thing he did was he set up a second governing authority, which is the Partnership Council. Now, fresh out of the general elections, you'll understand this analogy really well. That's our government. So it's our series of MPs up and down the country that stand for a 3-year term. They represent a constituency. They're elected. We're just going through our Partnership Council elections at the moment. We've had 87% of our seats contested, which is excellent, and we will have elections starting on Friday this week. But those individuals are elected, they go through hustings, but they're elected by their constituents and they stand for a 3-year term. They meet with the chairman and the partnership board at least 4 times a year, sometimes more. And on 2 occasions during the course of the year, when we announce our half-year results in September and when we announce our full-year results in March, they hold the chairman to account. So what does that mean? Well, in practice, what it means is the chairman stands in front of them and presents the results that we've generated under the balance of partner, customer and profit. And once he's done that, the Partnership Council vote on his leadership. And if 2/3 of them vote against him, then he walks out of that meeting and out of his chairman's office and he's gone, and we appoint a new chairman. So his A shares he uses very, very carefully to make sure that he's constantly engaging everyone and making sure he's making the right decisions. Now, I have to say that we are only on our 5th chairman in our history. So we haven't ever had a moment where the chairman has been evicted unceremoniously at a Partnership Council meeting. And that's because that power is held very gently. And then the third governing authority is the Partnership Board. Now, the Partnership Board is comprised of a balance of executive and elected. So the chairman appoints 5 executive members onto that board. Andy Street, the managing director of John Lewis, Mark Price, the MD of Waitrose. We've got Patrick Lewis, who is the founder's great nephew, who runs Partnership Services, our goods not for resale operation. Tracy Killen, who's our HR director, and Lorraine Woodhouse, who's our finance director. So those 5 are the appointed. But the Partnership Council also elect 5 onto our board. And so they balance the number of appointed directors. And so therefore we have a partnership board which constantly makes decisions about the strategic direction of the business, with partners having their voice at that table, as well as the executive having their voice as well. And I've mentioned partnership bonus a moment ago. That 11% figure that was arrived at in March of this year was arrived at because the partnership board decided that was the figure that should be shared. So half being elected and half being appointed. They were the ones that jointly decided how much we would share and how much we would retain for expansion and maintenance. So if we move on then just to one final thing, because this utopian world of the partnership might sound, full of roses and everything to people in this room. But Speeden was really mindful that in order to protect our culture and to make sure that we remained the business that he set up, he recognised that it wasn't going to suit everybody. That, you know, the more you made it very utopian in the way that he's made it, the less it would suit certain people. So we're really clear as an organisation that when we recruit people into the business, we're recruiting them to make sure that we're generating a sustainable culture for the future. And that we are performance managing people based on our values so that we don't lose that essence, that green thread, if you like, of what the John Lewis Partnership is all about. So it's very important to bear that in mind, and as I say, the founder was very conscious of that as well. I thought what I'd do now is just to try and give you a sense of how we bring that to life, because, you know, effectively when you're working as a partner in John Lewis, it's about how you work with your colleagues, how you work together. It's the behaviours that you show, it's the way in which you recognise people for things that they've done really well. I just wanted to show you our what we call our roof raiser campaign, which is an annual campaign that we have where partners across the business will be nominating their colleagues for really good things that they've done. And we sort of have a massive nominations process throughout the year. We get to a finalist moment, and I just want to show you our 4 finalists, and then I'd just like to show you who the ultimate roof raiser was, just to kind of give you a sense of the feeling of these moments. Now, I don't know, whoever's controlling the sound, can you whack up the volume a little bit? Is there seem like lots of buttons at the back there that might work really well on that. Are you poised? No. Give me a nod when you are and I'll press the button. Oh, I've just gone up. There we go. Woohoo. Let's have a little go, shall we? Different button.
I was nominated for work that I've done with the local housing developer to create a pack for customers to hopefully bring new business into John Lewis and public works.
I get to spend time with the customers. I think I've got the best job going.
The thing I'm most proud of is probably the success of Vision Man. We created something from nothing, and it was something that the business didn't have.
I was overwhelmed. I was shocked. I was surprised because I wasn't expecting anything like that for just doing my job.
It's been a bit of a shock, but it's been nice to be recognised for that work.
First of all, we got the data down, so the email really for this was quite well. For me, one of the really special parts of this is the fact that it's my colleagues. It's touching, but also it's good to know, in reference to the actual work that you do, that people respect it and mind.
They set up a little news flash wall at the top of our stairs with post-it notes of good wishes and royal a touch of wit.
Sorry.
I think that's the.
You're doing the third writing, and you're in this other one.
Shocked initially, and then quite touched that I would have made the absolute ultimate roof raiser.
I'd probably cry. To get to the final 4 is a pretty great place to be. I feel very privileged to have come this far. I certainly didn't expect it.
If I won, it would be fantastic. No matter what happens, I'm a winner because I've got a good team now.
I would be very pleased to win. Exhilarating, I think.
I don't want to do it all, but I don't worry, that's fine.
He got very emotional. So you can see there's a kind of a real sense of pride from these individuals, and to a degree a sense of pride and surprise that went hand in hand. Who do you think won then? Who would you reckon out of those 4? Furniture inspector? Anyone else? I'm going to guess the guy at the end. Guess the guy at the end? We've got 2 more to go. Pardon? Okay, so let's just have a quick look at who the winner was.
Now we come to the main business of the night, the ultimate roof raiser selection. Huge congratulations to all the roof raisers from across the division over the last 4 months. The roof raiser campaign, I think, has come to symbolise everything which is
So he gets to go on an all-expenses-paid holiday with his family to some nice sunny island courtesy of Kuoni. So he gets a whole series of prizes during the course of the year just to recognise him, which is sort of a little bit of an opportunity to make a fuss of someone who's done a great job. He created a John Lewis Man magazine. He didn't have to do it. It's part of his world, so he's in the sort of the John Lewis sort of editions and magazines world. But he chose in his spare time to create this magazine because he saw there was a niche for it. And in the ratings, I don't know what these magazine ratings are, but in the magazine ratings, it even beat Vogue Man in terms of popularity and readership. So he did really, really well. So very briefly then, if we just turn our attention, because I'm conscious I've talked about happy partners and sort of engaging partners in our operation. And of course, the reason that Speeden set this all up was not just for philanthropic reasons. It was to make sure that we had a really successful business. So I'm mindful that this was for commercial success. And obviously in today's world, we're really mindful as an organisation that customers are shopping in entirely different ways to the way that they used to shop. Technology is enabling them to shop in different ways, and we need to make sure that we are A, leading the customers in some of these fields, but B, absolutely following the areas that they'd like us to go in. And so you can see here, you know, just a bit of a motif that gives an idea of how customers are shopping with us. So we're doing a lot of things. So you know, our johnlewis.com website, for example, now takes about 40% of our total business. It's open 24/7. And it saw bigger peaks on Black Friday last year than we saw any of the peaks over the Christmas period. So we've got a mechanism to enable customers to have both convenience and accessibility to John Lewis as a brand. But of course, we're also looking at ways in which we can ensure that our physical space is addressing that too. So whereas in the olden days, we might well have had a full-line department store or a full-line supermarket for Waitrose, we've now moved into different models. So our small full-line department stores, which are trading generally on about 50,000 square feet rather than 150,000 square feet, or Food and Home for Waitrose, which is bringing in both the benefits of our department store assortment along with food, right the way down to the convenience areas. So the at-homes for John Lewis, because at the time of the economic crisis, there were no physical spaces available. No builders were building them at all. They had no money. But there were retail parks and retail sites around the country that were beginning to become vacant. And as a consequence, we developed the at-home format, which is just about the home assortment for John Lewis, which fits into about a 30,000 square foot template. And then the convenience shops for Waitrose, given that the convenience shopping that food shoppers are now demonstrating is really, really key to the supermarket industry. I don't know how many people in this room go for a once-a-week supermarket shop with a trolley and that's it. Or a bit like me, whether you dip in every time you think the fridge is empty or you want something on your way home. That convenience is changing the way in which supermarket shopping looks. And so as a consequence, we need to be very alive to that and making sure that we are reflecting it. And similarly to everything about partners, Speeden has had a thought or a rule on this as well, which is that when he's looking at his customer base as a business, as an organisation, he was really conscious we just had to be selective. That as an organisation, we shouldn't just go out and try and get every single customer, but that we should really differentiate, we should be really clear about who our customers were, stick to our knitting and make sure that we really delivered well for that target group of customers. So, unsurprisingly, our marketing team have done a great job at making sure that we understand who our customers are, how they want to shop, what they want to shop, and how they want to be served, so that we can sort of influence the whole sort of nature of retailing in John Lewis and the John Lewis partnership to make sure that we address that. And of course, one of the areas which has come up very strongly over the last few years is the annual Christmas advertisement for John Lewis, which never used to happen, but as we've become more confident in our own skin as an organisation, we've been more confident about the way in which we present ourselves at key moments during the shopping calendar. So you'll always find that a John Lewis advert is about dialing up trust and love. It's not about dialing up sort of mass consumerism or capitalism or bling or blitz or whatever you might get, sort of excesses that you might get from other organisations at Christmas. But the thing that sort of always touches me, makes me smile a little, which is why I thought it might be appropriate for a happy conference, is to see how customers react to the John Lewis brand. So some of you may have seen this, so I'm not going to apologise for it if you have, because it always makes me smile. But anyone watch Gogglebox in here? So the Gogglebox moment where the Christmas advertisement for John Lewis was shown was a magical one for me, because it showed what the nation's reaction to John Lewis in an advert form was, you know, positives and negatives and just the kind of asides. So I'll let it speak for itself, he says.
The amount of people that have spoken to me saying they want a little Monty. Idiots. I've got goosebumps.
Somebody's going to cry over it, isn't it?
Yeah. He just wants to love and
Wants a girlfriend.
Your boyfriend.
What's he got there, blabbed out?
Oh, that there's a mate for him.
He's got his little penguin girlfriend. He got a cuddly penguin for his cuddly penguin.
Do you know what I mean? If you've got your original toy, you can't replace them.
No, if he's giving it a friend.
That's what I thought. I thought, once you've got your original toy,
He's a heartwarming in any sense.
Anyway, so I thought that might just bring to life a little bit about what we try to do with engaging customers as well, because it's always a good acid test for us as to whether we've managed to get that about right. And of course, the creation of that comes from our own partners as well. So I think I'm left by posing you with one final question, which is, what opportunities and challenges do you see in balancing a successful business with a happy workforce? And Henry, I'm not sure whether I leave that question hanging there or whether you want the audience to ask me anything before I make tracks.
Well, you've got to go in a few minutes, haven't you?
I've got about 10 minutes or so, yeah.
Okay. I think we've got a question for Simon.
Great.
It's actually just, I'm curious. I wondered if anyone from the Lewis family still works at John Lewis.
Yes, they do. So Patrick Lewis, who's the Managing Director of Partnership Services, is the great-nephew of the founder. Yep.
I'll throw that far.
Throw it to me and I'll throw it out there.
I'm interested about, you talked about how important recruitment is and getting the right people in the right field. Where you must make mistakes. How do you manage that process?
So we have a process whereby we've got an online assessment tool which will make sure that we're filtering out those that don't have the right values, and an interviewing process which obviously tries to gather as much information as possible. But when someone has joined us, 3 months in, they'll have a 3-month review which will give us a sense of whether they've been able to integrate properly within a team. Because our partners feel so passionate and proud about the business they work in, they're not shy about giving their views and their feedback. So very often we will hear whether someone is integrating properly, whether there's any issues at all. So the 3-month moment is a key moment to make sure that we're assessing how someone has done. But then the first year annual anniversary, so the moment where we do an annual review of their performance. So our performance reviews are based on the what and the how. So the what the person does based on their job description, their role profile for the job, but how they do it, so the behaviours that they apply to the job that they do. And bringing those two together in an annual review of performance makes for a very rich conversation about how someone is performing in the fullest sense. And those moments normally then draw out whether we've got someone who is enthusiastic about being a part of the business but just needs some help to get there, or someone who really doesn't fit. We'll have some adult conversations about that, and an individual will either make a choice of their own that they don't want to be part of the organisation, or performance management will kick in. But we're very open and honest about what we require, and if someone isn't delivering on it, then we'll be very clear about where those gaps are. There's also a moment at 5 years, so when you get to your 5-year anniversary, there's a chance for you to have your conversation with your senior line manager in your area, and effectively the founder called out the 5-year anniversary as the moment where we would be thanking an individual for their contribution over 5 years, and we'd be saying that because you've stayed with us for 5 years, it's highly likely you're going to continue the rest of your career with us at this moment. And so we want to say thank you. So there's a small gift that goes to a 5-year anniversary partner. And then at 25 years, an individual will get another conversation and another gift, which is 6 months sabbatical. So they'll have 6 months paid leave to go and do off whatever they want, wherever they want, as a sort of a mid-career break, but a reward for having worked for the business for so long. And then they come back to their original job and carry on refreshed and ready to go for the remainder of their career. So there are several stage gates throughout someone's career where we can identify and spot whether someone's excelling or whether they're struggling.
Hi, thank you. That was really beautiful. It really should have come with a mascara warning, though. So I have a question around how you do that lovely roof raiser idea, and I've tried to implement that in different places since I've moved to the UK, and I found sometimes it's a challenge because instead of making people feel good, it makes other people feel bad or like they didn't agree with that. And I come from North America, where I've always worked. It's something that people should always attain to. So it's taken me a long time to get my head around it just being viewed differently here. But I wonder if you could, I guess, speak to that as an idea.
Sure.
Is it something to do with your values, and how do you do that?
So a couple of things I'd say. I think first of all it's led from the top. So Andy Street, who you saw there, who's the divisional managing director for John Lewis, presents the award, but he also launched the roof raiser campaign when it first started to say that it was important. The other important thing to say is it's a regular heartbeat throughout the year. So every month there is a roof raiser that is recognised for every area within the business. So all teams are constantly acknowledging and recognising an individual that has been their ultimate roof raiser in their location. So at the end of the year, every area's got 12 people that has won their local roof raiser award, and those are the individuals that then go forward to the ultimate roof raiser finalist challenge. All of those individuals that are chosen by partners. So within each area, there's an elected group that sort of gets together to decide who are going to be the people that have ticked the boxes the best, and therefore who's going to win. So when Andy Street announced Scott Pendress as being the overall winner, his nomination and his winning nomination was decided by a group of partners operating in the business, and they said to Andy, "This is who we want to win." So I think there's a sense of collective choice that's being made there, which makes it a little less top-down. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes what you're describing emerges where you've got managers and leaders in the business deciding, because there's almost that sort of sense of, why didn't they pick me? What was wrong with me? Whereas if it's colleagues, it's a bit more peer-to-peer, and it feels much more collaborative and a little less divisive, I think. So that's how we've made it work anyway.
And do you ever have people who feel like that, or do you find that you don't?
I've not come across any.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that
Fantastic.
doesn't mean say it happens, but I've
Yeah.
not come across any. Not in a big way like you're describing that might sort of halt the whole programme in its steps.
Yeah.